And I'm going to argue that actually a hybrid process is now most appropriate for me, but also try to reach a definition of what that hybridity is by looking at some key terms, that is intermedia, multimedia and hybridity. But first of all, I've got two devices here. They're called crackle boxes, and I'll tell you more about these in a minute. But in order for them to make a noise, you have to turn them on, and then you can use your fingers here, and it creates a circuit. So please, Faye, would you like to try one? Now, the experimental part is to find the noise that you make, but also to invite the person next to you to touch your arm, for example, when you're playing it.
Right.
So when you're actually playing it, ask somebody to touch your skin. Does that make a difference?
No, it hasn't.
It depends on the type of skin you've got and whether it's dry or not. Now, is the other one working? You need to use 6 fingers. That's it. That's good. Good. No, don't stop, Mark. Now, while that... Okay, now, this accompanies it here. Okay, can you get...
Like, how can you go to hand at the beginning? Wonderful.
So I'll make a start now with, you can carry on making a noise. I don't mind a bit of disruption. So why not ask a question? And the question is my artistic practice post-digital, and what is the post-digital? And so it points towards the relationship that we might be evolving with digital technologies, which is actually to regard them as a default, but also to think about what it is to be human in relation to the digital. That's a very important thing. So the hybridity that I'm discussing is really about a combination of the human and the digital, neither one nor the other, but the two. So the post-digital is defined through hybridity. So now you can't read the top bit because the projector's a bit wonky there. Basically zeros and noughts, that's the digital. And I've been looking at this term called auratic, which is relating to the distinctive quality or essence of a person, work of art or object. It's associated with the physical and corporeal. And of course, we occupy the physical corporeal realm that is distinct from the digital. So in order to understand hybridity, it's necessary to sort of fuse the two together. And that's what I do with my own practice. So the hybrid is of mixed character, composed of different elements. So looking at intermedia, it's a term that's derived or was developed with reference to the Fluxus artist movement of the 1960s. And Dick Higgins discusses it in one of his publications. And of course, inter means between. It doesn't mean multi or hybrid. It means that a new genre has been created which actually sit between or moves between existing genres of artistic and creative practice. So he identified a mechanistic approach and to an automated approach, which is arguably in the 1960s actually looking forward to the place we are now, which is intensely automated digital world. So multimedia is using many media, and historically it's associated with the way that we engage with technologies and the way that a variety of media forms will actually align and be used together. So actually multimedia here is that we're using some analog circuitry here, a physical object, a visual display here. So this is multimedia too. So for my own practice, I'm interested in actually making these two worlds collide, the physical and the digital, the physical and the virtual. And I've done that by actually using input devices which vary from the mouse and the keyboard, but nevertheless require a human being to actually interact with a machine, which then gives a response or feedback. So there are sensors behind the paper here actually responding to the strokes of the stylus or the palette that I'm using, the palette knife that I'm using. So let's look at some historical examples. Hoping this is going to work. Let's see if it's here already. Oh, it is here. Now I wanted to jump to about here. Here. So this is a Nam June Paik actually arranging for a car to crash into a robot, and then he sort of rebuilds it later on. So these are his drawings for actually recreating the robot which had been run over. I just want to turn the volume up a little bit here, if I can. No, I can't at the moment. Anyway, Misha Vazovitz in the early 1970s evolved these input devices which actually run on MIDI rather than on purely digital data. And it's called the hands. I'll just leave that running for a moment because actually it's reminded me of something that I've experienced with my own performances, is that you go to quite a strange place when you're connected to these hybrid devices, that you're not located consciously as I am now in front of you, but there's like another area, a creative area, which is something to do with the way that you're connecting with the technology itself and the way that you've become converted into a different mode. Now obviously that does have an impact on the relationship that we might assume that we have as a static relationship with a mobile telephone or a tablet. But I think it's worth interrogating and questioning what that relationship is, because we get caught up in it. It's something that we're very accustomed to. But these devices actually predate what I'm talking about, the tablet and the phone. However, they actually do look forward to the sort of immersion with that technology that I'm describing, that I'm interested in my own practice of interrogating. Now, let's go, stop that. Let's go back. It's worth noting that actually these crackle boxes were designed by Michel Vazovitz. They're still in production, but they use circuit bending technology where he was using electronic devices, but actually he was hacking them in order to find out what would happen or what sounds would be generated by interfering with the circuitry. And of course, we're using touch devices all the time, and the electrical current generated by the body is actually what allows us to manipulate information on a touchscreen. And that's actually what's happening with these devices too, even though they predate, they're strictly speaking electronic rather than purely digital. So I put this slide in, which you can't read properly, which is really how does how does this topic, you know, my elaboration of these terms, relate to teaching multimedia? Well, I think it's worth saying that I'm interested in students interrogating and challenging what it is that they're using the technology for. And essentially, the digital media program which I teach on is it's about digital multimedia production, animation, web design, digital imaging. It's about how different media forms come together and convene into one specific project. That is the sort of broad overview of what the program's about. So obviously there needs to be measurable outcomes and so on, and assessments and so on. So just thinking more about hybridity and the sort of the acclimatization. I now am completely immersed in it, that I'll be looking at a tablet or checking my phone or doing something on the computer, that I take that for granted. But I think it's very much, it's worth looking at, because the hybridity that I'm describing is my existence. You know, it is something which we share in terms of the engagement with the technology that we're using all the time. And I think it's worth actually challenging that and being provocative about it and say, well, what's going on? What assumptions are we making about it? How is subjectivity channeled and processed through the technology that we used, or even determined through it? And the discussion earlier about trolling and role-playing and also aggression via these devices, via a network, is particularly relevant, because an aspect of human nature might actually be foregrounded more than others because of the anonymity, for example, of the devices and the network, the characteristics of the technology that has been built. So I'm just recapping really on the information which I covered earlier on, and just reiterating this principle of hybridity, which really for me is, because of my historical artistic practice, I'm very interested in actually physical things which I can relate to and touch. And that's why these crackle boxes in particular have got resonance for me too. So please, could you pass them along so that somebody else could have a go? I don't want to deprive you of being able to play with them. So you turn it on and then you touch those 6 little pads together. See if you could play a tune on it, perhaps. See, Alan, you've actually got the talent for it there. It's to do with the actual current that you're generating. Even by touching 3, that's relatively unusual, yeah.
Not fair. That's squeaky. I thought I'd have more rotund sound. No, it's okay because I'm going to go to it. I will touch you. No,
You need to touch his skin. Does it make a difference?
no, you got a duffel on here.
It's a slight... So finally, this is an example of the my own hybrid practice where I've actually got electric guitar, which obviously, well, not obviously, but relies upon electronic signals, magnetic signals. But also I've combined it with a microprocessor which I've programmed to run this little wheel here. And also I've got a tin with beads in it, which is spinning round on the right there. So it's a sort of little impromptu one-man band or a sort of improvised device of some kind. So I'd actually, for the future, I want to actually bring more of these together so that there's a number of different devices, a bit like one of those guys, I haven't seen one for years, who's got a little rope on his foot and a one-man band. So that would actually be worth doing. And I've actually built a pickup, a miniature pickup for Sam Bailey, who's a music improviser, and he puts it inside the piano and does other even more peculiar things with it when he's improvising with his music. So that performative aspect of the use of hybridity is quite important because actually it involves the physical, and I think that that in a way is forgotten in the relationship that we have with a lot of digital media, because essentially by definition the digital is not physical. It is electronic pulses. It's tiny soldered parts within a particular device or data running around on a network. But we are in the physical world here, and it's sort of the question of how feelings and emotions, and also the sort of sense of us being physical beings, can be communicated through digital media, that I think is a sort of a project for me using the hybridity that I'm describing. So I'll just play you a bit more of this. If anybody else wants to have a go on the crackle boxes,
You've got about 2 more minutes.
if we can bear it. I'll just go back. So I'm using a different type of crackle device there.
Great if they came up and said, leave the building as a fire alarm.
So I think I've just got a couple more slides here. So I haven't got a conclusion. Thank you.
What a wonderful way to end that. Are there any questions for Tim? Yes, Brian.
Tim, thanks. Across your work now, that I've sort of seen it off and on for years, talking about hybridity, just so one of the things you might be hybridizing is intentionality and accident. And if I sort of take that into the sort of area of pedagogy, it does seem that, or I would like to comment on the fact that an observation is that students very often seem dominated by intentionality. They see what they make as being the outcome of an intention they've already had. And so they lose out on that marvellous aspect of your work. And I just wondered how you would observe the what your observation would be on that, and how, if you have managed to find a way, you know, in your teaching to sort of challenge that, which I suspect you have actually.
Well, when my students look at the various films I've got online, and if I was to show them this, they just say it's completely crazy, you're just mad to do this, you know, what the hell's going on? And already that for me is a good start. because actually it's challenging the place where they are. And also, when it's located in relation to the use of technology, I think it's really important for them to understand that it needs teasing apart the way that they're using the technology and what might constitute multimedia. But there is a difficulty with the instrumental purpose of my job as a lecturer in relation to the professional perspective and the employability agenda, because that is very much about directing students' skills and productions towards a specific end, rather than actually permitting them to innovate and be creative. And I think there's a distinct tension between those two agendas, which I find a little bit frustrating actually, and I know that you do as well, Brian.
Yes, please.
Can I ask a question about, I guess, behavior in a way? Because I really like what you're saying about, and I subscribe to the idea that digital can be, can promote or emphasize human qualities rather than sort of eclipsing them. But one thing that I found both as in a teaching context and in a creative context is, even though there's an ideal about genuine hybridity in that we have this mesh of a digital kind of activity or a virtual activity and a physical one or a human one, what you often find is that it's very binary in the sense that when somebody's looking at an iPhone, even from the free expression on their face, they are not there anymore.
Yeah.
Or when we're using Blackboard in a classroom, the connection between us and the students is gone.
Yeah.
And lots of examples, or even more practically, the more we put on Blackboard as a program team, the less students show up to class.
Yeah.
So there's all of these oppositions, and I was wondering if you had any ideas about how these ideals about the digital enhancing the human or vice versa, how we can square them with some of the more problematic practicalities of the fact that it often feels like when we check into one, we're checking out of the other.
Yeah.
Sorry, could you say?
I'm Robert Stillman from...
Yeah, thanks, Robert. Well, I haven't really discussed the context of my teaching on a daily basis during lectures, but certainly I would employ a variety of different strategies which might include PowerPoint or case studies as well as practical technical tasks. So there's a moment when I'm actually just talking to the students and looking at their work with sort of little mini tutorials. But I don't really have an answer to that. I think that it is still a problem, and the sort of VLE is a sort of barrier between us and the students and the process of learning potentially.